This is the JavaEE Web Development course, Lesson 5. And today we are going to be working on developing a form for a product. On our auction site, we want to create or have people create different products that have information about what the product is and things like that, and then save that data to our database and then also be able to retrieve it. We are going to start in this lesson with developing that form and all of the architecture and infrastructure for moving data between the form view on the client side and the database using our REST services. Uh, you'll recall from lesson 3, we did a bit of sending data uh, to and from our server with our login screen, but this is going to be much more in depth, and we're going to take advantage of some other technologies and tools to make sending form data and packaging that data up as an object and making that as simple as possible. I'm actually going to start today with just a little bit of cleanup. If you remember, we've got our Java EE project open here. You'll see a couple of files that we're going to be working with today. So we can ignore those for now. Um, but last time we were working with this REST main class that was handling our login, and then we had also used this for some of our very early on just little test functions. We're starting to build this into a project, a real product, and so we're going to clean this up. So I'm actually going to rename this file, and so you can say refactor. And then if you hover over refactor, you'll see an option for rename. So we're going to rename this class instead of REST main. This is going to become our users class, our user class. And so we're going to rename it to user. And you'll see more of why we do that um, later on as we build out our product class. And I'm also going to get rid of these are functions. This hello function and list name functions are things that we're not going to be using in our project anymore. So you can see that when I refactored and did a rename, it automatically renamed my class to be user as opposed to REST main, and as well as renaming the file. So that's just a quick little cleanup thing that we need to do. And now we're going to move forward to developing our product page. If you go to the lesson 5 files, you'll see several files here. Um, we're going to go ahead and bring them one by one into our project. We're going to start with the product.html file. So you can right click and copy that file, and we're just going to paste it into source main web app, and it just will go right here in the web app file. So you can say copy and paste. I've already pasted it in, so I've got it here, but you can paste that into the web app directory. And let's take a look at what's in here. Now, a lot of this is going to be familiar from what we did with our login screen. Again, we're using Bootstrap to manage our form layouts, which again ensures that whether you're doing this on a desktop, a laptop, a phone, a tablet, the layout of the form is going to look clean. And then we're using jQuery as we have before. We started a little bit of CSS, our styling for our site. There's not a lot there yet, but we'll continue to use that. And you'll see one change in our login screen. We're referencing login.js. Here we're going to reference product.js. So all of the functionality for the screen is going to be in that um, product.js file. And so this is we're trying to work with our MVC model view controller architecture. So we just want the view, the actual layout of the screen in this file. Any functionality, which is the controller, will go in the JavaScript file. So we're just trying to hold to that MVC architecture here. I'll walk through this quickly. It should be pretty straightforward. Again, we have this container class, which is a Bootstrap container, a row class, and then we're dividing things. If you remember, with Bootstrap, the screen is divided up into 12 columns, and so we want to have 2 equal columns in our form. So we're going to put 6 columns on the left and then 6 columns on the right. On the left side of the form, we're going to have input fields for product name and description. And on the right side, we're going to have inputs for the listing start date and listing end date. And you'll see that these are of type date. And you'll see that just by specifying date, we get some cool functionality right out of the box. For now, I'm putting 2 buttons at the bottom of the form. One to create a product, so that would allow us, we type in all the information, a product name and its description and the listing start and listing end, and if we click that create product, it will then store that information in the database. And then load product is a button that we will use just to retrieve some data from the database. Obviously, this will need to be fleshed out more, but this will get us started with being able to retrieve data from the server. And then I've got a little div at the bottom, which we're just going to use to display information about our action. When we hit create product, then we want to put a little message in that div that says, yep, we created the product successfully, or no, we had an error or a problem with that. So that's the product.html file. Let's look at the JavaScript that goes behind it. So again, this will look similar to what we did with the login class. Basically, if you remember with jQuery, when the form or the screen is loaded, jQuery will automatically run this function document.ready. And all we're doing in this function is we're attaching a couple of handlers to those 2 buttons. So if you click the product form button on submit, the submit event is fired, as you can see here. It's a submit button. So when we see that submit event, when you click that button, we want to run this function. e.prevent default, if you remember, just basically says, I'm going to handle this event. Don't do any of the default submit stuff that the browser is programmed to do. And so we just want to have that in there to kind of interrupt the standard browser flow. We're going to handle this event. We'll come back to this line in a second, but here you'll see we're making an AJAX call again to our server. The URL is auction site web API, which is where all of our REST services are mapped to. And then we're starting to divide things out. So under auction site web API, I'm going to have a set of functions that have to do with products, creating a product, loading a product, updating a product, putting a bid on a product, things like that. So I'm going to have a file, and we'll see this in a minute, that handles all of the product REST functions. And then for now, I'm just going to create a new function within that file. It's called product. It should probably be called something like create product because that's what we're doing here. But I'm not for now because I want to show you something to do with this. We're seeing our type is post. We're going to post some form data to the server. If you look below here, we're going to have another function for when we click that load product button, and you see that it goes to the same URL, but because the type is get, you will see that we can actually have 2 identical URLs, but it will do different things based on whether the call is a get or a post. So that's basically why I'm doing this. We'll come back later and rename this to something like create product or load product or something that's a little more helpful to us. But I want us to see the difference between the get and post. The other important thing to notice here is we are not, with the login screen, we just sent some data over, just some text, plain text there. Today we're going to be sending JSON, and JSON is a way for us to bundle up a whole object into a single kind of package that's easy for our server to decode and manipulate. So instead of sending, if we look at our login screen, before we didn't specify, it just is text by default. But we're going to specify here specifically that we're sending JSON data. And the data that we're going to send in is form data. I'm going to come back to that in a second. And if that succeeds, we'll call this product success, which basically says if we get an OK back from the server, we'll tell the user that we created the product. And if something else comes back, we'll tell them that it failed. Or if something goes wrong at our web service call, we'll call this little function that says, sorry, there was an issue with creating your product. Now this form data, if you are familiar with JSON, it's basically in a way to package an object, package all the data for an object. And so what we're going to do is use a couple of cool little jQuery functions, JavaScript and jQuery functions to bundle up the form data on this product form. So that is everything here, all of these fields, the product name, the description, the listing start, the listing end. And we're going to put it into a JSON string. So we're going to say create a JSON string from the product form, and we're going to call a function called serialize object. Now at the bottom of this product.js file is this serialize object function. So we're defining a function. So jQuery function serialize object, and this defines what it is. And let's excuse me. We don't need to know all of the ins and outs of it. This is a cool little function that you'll see kind of all over the web. It's just a way to package an object into a JSON string. So basically, we just lifted this code. It's just a little helper function that we find really useful. We don't have to understand it all now, but we'll see what it does in a minute. So we're going to take our form, we're going to serialize the data and build a JSON string with it. And then that is what we're going to send to our web service. So that's what that is doing. You'll see down here, if we click that load button, it's a different, this button is a submit button. This button is not a submit button. And so instead of capturing the submit event, I'm just capturing a click event. Either way is legit. So if we click this button, again, we're going to prevent default actions. We're going to call this URL, and we get some data, JSON data, back from the server that will contain an object, a product. And you can see if that function succeeds, I'm going to take two fields in the form, product name, so that is right here, product name, and product description, and I'm going to populate that with what comes back, the data, which will be, that's because we're using JSON, it's going to be bundled into an object. We will actually see data. We'll have two attributes, one called name and one called desk for description, and we'll display that on the screen. So that is the client side of this particular functionality. Let's go over and look now at what we're going to do on the server. Because now we're dealing with JSON, we're trying to pass an entire object to the server, not just one piece of information. Eventually, we're going to have a whole bunch of fields on this form. Everything related to a product, who's selling it, the status, how many bids, what the bids are, all those things. And so we don't want to deal with 50 different data fields coming from this form and have to manage them all separately. There are some great tools with JavaEE that will allow us to take what comes from a form and quickly and easily map it to an object on the server side. So let's start here. Again, so we had copied in these files, product.html and product.js to the web app side. Now, on the Java side, we've got a couple more files. So you can copy both of those. Let's copy both product.java and product.json. .java into our source main Java, and here's our package, if you remember. Copy them into here. We're going to start with product JSON. This is what we call a POJO, a plain old Java object. Basically, what this product JSON file is it defines an object. And this object, like our form has a name, a description, a listing start, and a listing end. So we're creating a simple Java object called product JSON, Java class, that has 4 attributes right now: name, description, listing start, and listing end. Now, the one thing that is important is for all of this kind of magic glue to work, these have to match. The name of the field, name, has to correspond to the attribute that we specify here. So name, desk, listing start, listing end. You'll see in our field we have name, desk, listing start, listing end. If those names don't match, the data won't get mapped correctly into our Java object. So we're just creating an object that has these attributes, and then we're creating getters and setters, basically real simple getters and setters for all of these objects. You'll see here I'm also creating a constructor, so we can quickly construct one of these objects, pass in those 4 attributes, and then they'll get set in the object. So this is a very simple little Java class that just basically wraps these attributes. Over here in our product.java class, we're going to use that POJO, that plain old Java object. You can see here in our Java class, we're going to import the product JSON class into our object. Before we get into this, there's one other thing we need to do. Remember, we configured in our pom.xml, this is our Maven kind of recipe file. It tells us all of the Maven components that we need. We're going to have to add one more thing. So I double clicked on pom.xml. It comes up here. If you click on this little tab, we'll get to see the actual text of this pom.xml file. If you remember, we have these dependencies, and we're using Jersey, Glassfish Jersey, and this Jersey container servlet core. And back in lesson 2, I believe, we added MySQL because we wanted to use MySQL here. You'll see here a little commented block that says uncomment this to get JSON support. That's exactly what we're trying to do here. We're going to use a little tool that comes with Jersey called Moxie. It's not enabled by default, but we want to use Moxie. What Moxie does is basically takes JSON and maps it to a POJO, to a class, to an object. So we're simply going to uncomment this dependency. So I'll leave that there. We could get rid of that if we want to. So basically, we're adding a new dependency for Jersey Media Moxie. And if you save that, then Maven will do its thing and make sure that we've got the Moxie libraries that we need to do that. If for some reason you don't see that little commented block, you can just add this little dependency chunk to your pom.xml. But this just will bring in that JSON functionality to our Jersey servlet functionality. All right, now that we've got that, let's look at product.java. We have here, you'll recognize a lot of this, we've got a class called product. The path for all of the servlets, all the REST APIs here are referenced from product. So if we'll say auction site, web API, product/product. You remember that's what we're calling. And then here is if we have a GET request to product/product, it will execute this little function. And if we have a POST request to product/product, Remember, we were calling the same web API, just with different, whether one was a get and one was a post. So if it's a post, we're going to call this create product. Let's look first at get product. This is very simple. We're not reading from the database at this point. We're basically just going to say create a new one of these simple wrapper objects, the product JSON. Create a new one of those and populate it. Set the name, set the description, set the listing start and the listing end. And then send that object. Notice we don't have to do anything in terms of packaging it up as a JSON string or anything like that. We just say return this object back to our client. Super easy again, and like we said, Moxie does all of the work behind the scenes for us to render it back to the client in the format that it expects. The post function is a little more complex. The one thing I should note here, right here, this function produces JSON. So we're sending a JSON object back to the client. You'll see here, this method consumes JSON. We're going to get JSON data from the client. We're actually going to send back plain text. And you can see that is set here. So in this one, the data type that's coming back. So when we load the product, we're expecting JSON to come back. When we create the product, we're expecting text to come back. We're going to send JSON. We're going to get back text. Here, we're going to send text by default. Plain text is the default. There's actually nothing to send here, but we're going to get back JSON. So let's go back here. So this is our output string. By default, we're going to send back an OK. You'll recall from our login screen, we were doing some work with our database and we were selecting rows from the database. Here, we're actually going to be inserting a row into the database. We're at the very beginning here, we're not going to do much error checking to check and see if that row already exists, or if a product with that name already exists. We're just going to go ahead and slam the data in, and then we'll build out more of that functionality as we go. So if you remember, we need to specify a database connection. And so we're wrapping all of this in a try catch. So if there are any SQL exceptions, any issues with the database, we'll catch those here. But first we're going to open our connection. And remember that the connection is defined in that context.xml where we define what database we're connecting to, what username to use, all of that. So we've taken care of that. And then we're writing a simple insert string. Insert into auction site.product. Here are the fields: product name, description, listing start, and listing end. Values, and we're going to pass in 4 values. Now this is a standard way with SQL to bind data. We bind data with a question mark. So in an update or an insert, we use question marks, and then you'll see here in a second that we will bind data to each of those question marks. So we'll see how that goes in just a second. We, with MySQL, are going to use something called a prepared statement, and that's something that works very well for doing an insert or an update, as opposed to with our login class, which is now our user class. You see, double click that to open it. We just did statement execute query, and we get results back. That works great. But for an insert or an update, the prepared statement works better. So we're going to take our database connection dot prepare statement, and we pass in the query string. So that now we have the statement that corresponds to this insert SQL, and now we're going to bind the data that we want. So for the first question mark, it basically says look for the first question mark, and where you see that, replace it with new product, which I skipped over. Let's talk about that now. What's going to come into this function because of that Moxie glue? We're going to send the JSON data from the form, and it's going to get mapped right into one of these objects. So we're going to have a product JSON object called new prod that is going to have all of the fields populated for us automatically. And that's kind of the beauty of that Moxie connection piece. So we're basically going to say then get the name of that new product and put that in the first parameter, get the description, put that in the second question mark or bind parameter. Listing start is the third and listing end is the fourth. And then we just basically say, now that we've got the statement and we've bound all the data to it, we just say execute. And if there's an error, we're going to return a SQL error to the user, to the client. We can make this more robust later on as we go through it. And then basically all we have to do is close that statement and close our connection. And then return output, which will either be OK or SQL error. So that's most of the functionality. Couple things that we need to do in our database before we test all of this. I'm going to open this up here. So you may, if you have this, I can close this out for now. So if you open up MySQL Workbench, we're going to open up our connection to the database. See here, I have a bunch of queries that I've been running. You remember this that we did from lesson 3 where we were inserting that row in the user table. I've been doing some work here on the product site. So we need to do a couple of things with our product table. So if you look down here, here's our auction site database. Let's expand that, expand the tables. Here's our product table. And if you remember, here are the columns that we defined here. Oops. I'm going to go ahead and if you click on this little wrench, that is will allow us to edit the table. I'm going to turn this off because I'd already done that. All right, apply. Oh. Okay. Two things here. First of all, I've already changed this. When we created this table, we called the description field. Oh, sorry, let me fix this here quick. All right, here we go. So we call this desk. Now that's actually a problem because desk is a reserved word in MySQL. So let's start with this. This is pretty quick and easy to do. We're going to change description desk to description. So just basically double click that, change the name, keep it at 500 and just hit apply and apply. Now, the other thing is, remember we have this ID product that is our primary key. It's just an integer that gets incremented. So for each product, it'll have a name and a description, but then it's got a key, product number 127 or whatever. That is just an easy way for us to reference that data. This AI checkbox, for you, it will be unchecked. Basically, this is called auto increment, and it allows us, basically it says every time when we specify something as an auto increment field, we're telling MySQL that when you create a new one of these, just automatically give us a new unique key, auto increment. So the first one will be 1, the second one will be 2, third one will be 3, and we don't have to pass it in. It will get created for us. So that's actually a pretty slick little way to manage a primary key in a MySQL database. So we want to change this to be an auto increment field. There's one problem though. If you remember, our photo table and our bid table reference ID products. If we look at bid, we're referencing the product table, ID product in the product table. So for each, if there's a bid on a product, we don't know which product we're bidding on. So MySQL won't allow us to change this primary key field, a field, if there's a foreign key attached to it. So we have a couple things we can do. We can either drop and recreate this foreign key. So drop this foreign key, make the change, re-add the foreign key. I'm actually going to do There's another little bit easier way. It's a little bit more dangerous. You can potentially do something you don't want to do here, but we're going to go ahead and do it. So MySQL has a parameter called foreign key checks, and we're going to turn that parameter off. So I just type in, if you go to your query page, just type in set foreign key checks equals 0. We're going to turn off foreign key checks. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to turn this off. So apply this quick. So now this is what you've got, what you should have, ID product, and it is not auto increment. Now we've turned off foreign key checks. Click this auto increment, and then hit apply. Then it's basically saying change column to be an auto increment column. We hit apply, and it will say, all right, we did it. So now we've changed the description. We've made ID product auto increment. Let's go back and turn foreign key checks back on. We want that by default. We just wanted to bypass it for a minute while we did this quick update to our table. So we'll execute that. Foreign key checks are turned back on. All right. At this point, we should have everything that we need for our simple product form. Let's go ahead and if you click on the servers tab here, we're going to start our server. Actually, I'm going to click on debug because we'll start it in debug mode so we can see some of what's going on here. So we're starting up our server in debug mode. We'll set a breakpoint here. I've got one set here already. If you just go to this line, click in this little blue section and say toggle breakpoint. We're going to turn a breakpoint on here and create product. And I'm not so worried here. We don't need one here at the moment. Don't need anything here. Here's our HTML and our product.js. So now let's go to our website. So we're going to localhost 8080 auction site product.html, and let's load that up. So when you load that page, you should see our form. You can see it's split in half as we specified, and it's got these 4 fields: product name, description, listing start, and listing end. So let's start by creating a product. We're going to say this is product 1, and our description, this is our first product. The start date, so you'll see, remember we specified that this is a date field. So you can either type in the date, month, day, year. This is just by specifying that it's a date field, you get this great little bootstrap calendar tool. So you can go on, let's start it tomorrow. And let's make the listing end the next day. So it starts on 11:29 and ends on 11:30. I'm going to set some breakpoints over here in my JavaScript so we can see everything that's happening here. If you go to settings and then more tools and developer tools, you remember this. This is our our tools for our browser. I'm going to open up, I don't need product.html, but let's go to the JavaScript and open up product.js. So I'm going to put a breakpoint in here, right here. So when we click that submit button, we can see some of what's happening here. So I've got my data for my product. I'm going to go ahead and click the button. And you see we hit our breakpoint. So let's see what's happening here with this little JSON stringify serialize object. Form data, I'm going to step over this line. So what do we get? Form data creates a great little JSON string. JSON strings have brackets around it, and then it's name value pairs. So we've got the product name is product 1, the description is this, the listing start is this, and the listing end is this. So you can see it just packages up all our data into a JSON string, and then we're going to let it rip, and we will hit the breakpoint over on the server side. So now we've sent that JSON string to the server. I'm going to go ahead and open this debug window. Now, let's see what's in new product. This is what, remember we have this Pojo class, and it automatically gets populated. Didn't have to do anything. The name is product one. The description is this is our first product, and here's the start and end dates. Works slick. So we can step through this and kind of go through all of that. I'm just going to go ahead and cut it loose. And there we go there. Let's go back to our client side, and you see product created. So we've actually put this data in the database. We can check over here in MySQL. I'm just going to do a select star from auction site product. You can see I had some test data in here. Product one, this is our first product. Here's the start and end dates. So we basically went from our form to JSON string to an object straight into the database. Easy as can be. Let's check the other side. Now, if we look back at, I'm going to flip back to the JavaEE perspective because it's a little easier to read. When we call get product, we're just going to get some, we're not reading from the database. We're just going to create some data and send it back to the server. So I'm going to set in a little breakpoint over here. So we're going to call this, when we click the product load button, we're going to call this, and then if it's successful, it's going to go here. So I'm going to set a breakpoint here in the get product success. So let's click this button, and you can see it went to the server, got the data, and you can see it comes back in an object. We've got the description, the listing end, the listing start, and the name. Now, for now, I'm just populating the name and the description. This is, again, just simple jQuery. We find this, this input field and then set the value to data.name, which would be whatever the name is, my test product, and the description will be set to this is the product description. So if we cut this loose, you'll see the name and description change here. So we can also, we should build this out to show the listing start and listing end that come from the database. So basically, in this lesson, we've seen how we can create a form, package the data as JSON, send it to the server, store it in the database, and then take data from the server, send it back to our form, and then populate form fields. You'll have work to do now. I'm going to have you work on building out the form and adding new fields and things to this form, and then we'll continue to build it out to get more and more of the real functionality that we want. But this basically shows you how you can create a form on the client side and manipulate it using our REST services and Jersey.